You're just a failed vet, Emma. Look at your brother and learn what success looks like. My mother spoke those words into a microphone on a Saturday afternoon in late May. She was standing on the cedar deck of a 4-bedroom colonial in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, addressing 50 guests who were holding craft beers and sweating in the spring humidity. She intended it as a public humiliation. She did not know that a block away 4 unmarked black SUVs were idling waiting for my signal. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just handed my brother a red envelope containing a federal asset freeze warrant right as the police sirens began to wail. If you want to know how a veterinarian sent her own family to federal prison without ever raising her voice, take a second to hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love reading those. Now let's get into it. My name is Emma Greta. I am 32 years old, and 4 years ago I opened Oak Creek Veterinary in Delaware County. It operates out of a converted brick pharmacy building. The margins are tight. I have a habit of discounting procedures for elderly clients on fixed incomes. It is a terrible business practice, but I prefer to sleep at night. My brother Julian operates on a different frequency. He is 35, sells enterprise software, and treats his income like a scoreboard. He leases a new Audi every 24 months and wears suits that require dry cleaning twice a week. My mother Beatrice was a bookkeeper for an auto parts distributor for 2 decades. She views Julian's life as an extension of her own worth. When Julian bought a $400 espresso machine, she posted 3 photos of it online. When I opened my clinic, she asked if I couldn't have found a cleaner profession. At Sunday dinners, she served Julian the first cut of roast, while reminding me that small business owners shouldn't take second helpings if they want to afford their overhead. The groundwork for my ruin was laid 3 years ago. During my first year in business, I was drowning in state compliance forms and vendor invoices. Beatrice offered to handle my personal tax returns. It saved me $1,000 in accountant fees. I handed her my W-2 forms, my articles of incorporation, and my social security number in a manila folder. I handed her the keys to my identity, assuming a mother's help was just that. Fast forward to October of last year. The clinic's digital X-ray machine, a refurbished unit I bought at auction, failed. The repair technician told me a replacement sensor array would cost $45,000. I had $12,000 in liquid capital. I put on a blazer over my scrubs, printed my profit and loss statements, and drove to my local bank branch. The loan officer, a man named Mr. Abernathy, had approved my initial business line of credit. He knew my payment history was spotless. He took my paperwork, typed my information into his terminal, and waited. I watched his eyes track the screen. His posture shifted. He stopped typing, looked at his keyboard, and then looked at me. "Emma," he said, tapping his pen against a notepad, "your debt-to-income ratio exceeds our lending limits. We cannot approve a $45,000 equipment loan when you are carrying a $720,000 mortgage." The air in the cubicle went stale. The hum of the bank's HVAC system suddenly sounded very loud. "I rent an apartment on Elm Street for $1,400 a month," I said. "I do not own property." Mr. Abernathy turned his monitor. The screen displayed a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage for a property in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It had been originated 11 months prior. The primary borrower was Emma Greta. The co-signer was Julian Greta. In veterinary medicine, when a trauma case comes through the door, a dog hit by a car, a cat with a laceration, your training overrides your adrenaline. You assess the damage, isolate the bleed, and act. You do not panic. Panic kills the patient. I did not panic. I asked Mr. Abernathy to print a hard copy of the credit report. I thanked him for his time. I walked out of the bank, crossed the asphalt parking lot, and sat in the driver's seat of my Honda. I unfolded the paper. There was the address. It was the exact house Julian had moved into last November. The house my mother had been praising at every family gathering, calling it proof of his financial genius. Julian had not bought a house. I had. I made my second mistake that evening. In veterinary medicine, we are taught to trust our baseline protocols. You do not skip steps. You do not guess. If a dog ingests a toxin, you induce vomiting before the poison processes through the liver. You act to limit the damage. I forgot my training. Instead of driving to a law firm or a police precinct, I drove to my mother's house. I operated under the assumption that a line existed that she would not cross. I believed that putting the physical proof on her kitchen table would fracture her denial and force an immediate correction. I wanted her to be a mother before she was a criminal. That was a costly assumption. Her house sits on a quiet street in Media, Pennsylvania. She bought it 20 years ago, and she spent the next 2 decades curating it to look like a place where important people lived. The lawn was cut to an exact 2 inches. The brass knocker on the front door was polished every Sunday. The driveway held her pristine sedan, and the decorative garden gnomes stood in perfect alignment along the walkway. I walked up those steps and through that door without knocking because I still had a key on my ring. Beatrice was in the kitchen. She was wearing a gray cardigan and standing at the counter pouring hot water over a decaf coffee filter. The kitchen smelled like roasted beans and lemon floor cleaner. She looked up when I walked in. She did not drop the kettle. She did not gasp. She looked mildly inconvenienced by the interruption, as if I had tracked mud onto her clean linoleum. I set the hard copy of the credit report flat on the granite island. I placed my index finger next to the line listing the Bucks County property. The paper was warm from sitting in my car. I asked her what she had done. She finished pouring the water. She set the kettle back on the stove and picked up her mug. She walked around the island, pulled out a wooden bar stool, and sat down. She sighed. It was the specific heavy sound a parent makes when a child asks a repetitive, pointless question. Julian needed a bridge, she said. Her voice held no variation. No tremor of guilt. His commission structure changed last quarter. The underwriter refused to approve the mortgage on his single income. Your credit history was just sitting there, Emma. You were not using it. Your clinic is barely breaking even anyway. I stared at the woman who raised me. I listened to her summarize a federal crime as if she had just borrowed my sweater without asking. You forged my signature on federal loan documents, I said. You stole my identity to buy a house. I optimized our family resources, she corrected sharply. She took a sip of her coffee. Julian is building equity. He is establishing a foundation for his future. He plans to refinance in 36 months and remove your name from the deed. You would not have agreed to help him if I asked, so I made the executive decision. Do not make a tragedy out of a technicality. She believed her own logic. To understand Beatrice, you have to understand how she measures value. Julian sold software to corporate accounts. He shook hands with vice presidents. His success was visible, and therefore it validated her parenting. My clinic was a converted pharmacy where I treated ear infections and pulled porcupine quills out of rescue dogs. In her accounting, my financial autonomy was a dormant asset. She repurposed it to fund the image she preferred for her son. I told her I was taking the paperwork to the police. The annoyance on her face vanished. The features hardened into something sharp and precise. She set her mug down. The ceramic hit the granite with a loud crack that echoed in the quiet kitchen. If you do that, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, steady whisper, you will send your brother to prison. You will destroy his life and his career over a temporary arrangement. And if you walk into a precinct, I will make sure every person in this family knows you did it out of pure jealousy. I will tell your aunts, your uncles, and the congregation that your business failed, and you tried to extort your own blood for cash. You will have no one. I looked at the credit report lying on the granite. I looked at the woman sitting across from me drinking her decaf coffee. I turned around and walked out the front door. The brass knocker rattled against the wood as the door closed behind me. I thought walking away was a display of control. It was actually a tactical failure. By confronting her first, I had tipped my hand. I gave her a 12-hour head start. Beatrice called Julian the moment my car left the driveway. By the time I woke up the next morning, Julian had already locked down the property deed. He transferred the liquid assets from his primary checking into an opaque account and retained a defense attorney who specialized in white-collar fraud. They built a wall while I was still trying to figure out how to navigate the terrain. I took the credit report to the local police department that afternoon. I sat in a plastic chair across from a desk sergeant who looked at my paperwork with tired eyes. He saw the matching last names. He saw my mother's address listed as my previous residence. He handed the papers back to me and shook his head. This looks like a civil family matter, he said. We see this when relatives co-sign and have a falling out. You need to take this to family court or hire a mediator. Local police do not investigate interstate mortgage origination disputes between siblings. I tried to explain the electronic forgery. I tried to explain that I never saw the documents. He pointed to the door and told me I needed a lawyer, not a patrol officer. I walked out of the station with my file folder, feeling the doors close on every side. The situation escalated the following morning. The fraud algorithms at my bank did not care about family dynamics. When I had reported the unauthorized mortgage inquiry to the loan officer, the bank's automated risk management software engaged. It flagged my social security number for identity compromise. I found out at 7 in the morning when I tried to log into my clinic's payroll portal. The screen displayed a red banner indicating a security freeze. I called the commercial banking line. A representative informed me that because I was listed as the sole personal guarantor for my veterinary LLC, the bank had frozen my operating accounts pending a full fraud investigation. An investigation, they said, could take up to 90 days to resolve. My clinic payroll was due in 48 hours. I had 3 veterinary technicians and a receptionist relying on those checks to pay their rent and feed their families. I had vendor invoices for surgical supplies scheduled for automatic withdrawal. My operating account held the exact funds required to cover the week, but I could not access a single cent. I stood in the center of my clinic. The waiting room smelled like bleach and dog treats. The kennels in the back held 3 recovering surgical patients. The hum of the refrigerators kept a steady rhythm. This place was the only thing I had built that belonged entirely to me, and my mother had paralyzed it from a kitchen stool in Media, Pennsylvania. I walked into the imaging room. The new digital X-ray machine was a fantasy now. In the corner sat my portable ultrasound unit. It was 3 years old but maintained in pristine condition. I used it for cardiac evaluations and emergency internal medicine. It was the most valuable piece of equipment I owned outright. I made 4 phone calls to other clinics in the county. On the 5th call, a veterinarian in Westchester agreed to buy it. He knew I was desperate. He offered me 60 cents on the dollar. I accepted the offer without negotiating. He arrived that evening in a white cargo van. I helped him load the ultrasound machine into the back. The wheels rattled over the threshold of the clinic door. He handed me a cashier's check for $8,500. I took it to a check cashing storefront, paid their exorbitant fee, and walked out with a thick envelope of cash in my pocket. The next morning, I called my staff into the break room. I handed them each an envelope containing their wages in $100 bills. I told them the bank had made a routing error. I did not tell them that my mother had traded our financial security for my brother's hardwood floors. By attempting to handle the crime like a daughter, I had granted my family the operational runway they needed to ruin me as a business owner. I lost my equipment. I lost my capital. But as I watched the cargo van drive away with my ultrasound machine the night before, I realized something vital. I no longer owed them my silence, and I needed a different kind of authority to fight a paper war. I stopped trying to be a daughter. Family ties rely on mutual preservation. When one side decides your survival is expendable, the relationship becomes a liability. I needed a professional who navigated wreckage for a living. I found Thomas Pierce. Thomas spent 15 years prosecuting financial crimes for the government before entering private practice. His office sat on the 4th floor of a glass building in downtown Philadelphia. He did not offer me a cup of coffee. He did not ask how I felt. He charged $400 an hour. I wired him a retainer using the last $12,000 in my personal savings account. It was the money I had saved for a down payment on a modest starter home. Instead, I bought a war chest. Thomas spread the printed credit report and the property deed across his conference table. He read the documents with a steady clinical rhythm. I told him about the desk sergeant at the municipal station. Thomas held up a hand, cutting me off. He tapped the lender's corporate address with his pen. "This bank is headquartered in Ohio," he said. "Your mother used the internet to cross state lines and forge documents for a federally backed mortgage. That is not a civil family dispute, Emma. That is a federal crime. We are done asking local patrol officers for help. We are taking this directly to the FBI. Building a federal case demands unbroken documentation." For the next 8 months, my life split into 2 distinct realities. During the day, I fought to keep Oak Creek Veterinary operational on incoming cash flow and high-interest credit cards. I scrubbed my own floors and answered ringing phones while monitoring anesthesia levels. I worked 14-hour days sustained by rigid determination. My second reality began after those doors locked. I sat in my apartment surrounded by banker boxes, acting as my own forensic accountant. Thomas needed 4 years of financial history. I compiled digital logs. I highlighted discrepancies and tracked Julian's employment changes against the exact dates my credit was accessed. My eyes burned from the laptop screen and the apartment radiator hissed through the winter months, but I did not stop. I was building the cage they were going to live in. My mother executed her public relations strategy with the same efficiency she used to steal my credit. Beatrice spun a narrative designed to isolate me. She called my aunts and cousins. She told them the stress of running a veterinary practice had triggered a psychological breakdown. She whispered that I was fabricating stories to extort money from Julian because I envied his new house. The poison worked. Extended relatives stopped returning my text messages. When I sent a birthday card to my younger cousin, it came back 2 weeks later with return to sender written in black marker across the front. I spent Thanksgiving eating leftover pasta at my kitchen table. I spent Christmas morning walking through a silent park holding a cup of gas station tea. I was excised from the family tree. Isolation breeds focus. In late February, the federal investigators subpoenaed the digital closing documents from the Ohio lender. They needed to establish exactly how the electronic signatures were captured. The documents contained embedded metadata including the specific Internet Protocol address utilized to finalize the loan. Thomas called me into his office to review the sequence. The investigator traced the digital signature back to a specific router. It was not routed through Julian's office. It was not routed through my mother's house. The Internet Protocol address belonged to my apartment. I stared at the numerical sequence on the printed report. A memory surfaced. The previous November, I attended a 3-day veterinary conference in Baltimore. I asked Beatrice to visit my apartment to feed my rescue cat. She agreed. The timestamps on the digital mortgage closing documents aligned precisely with the 48-hour window I was out of state. She sat at my kitchen table, connected her device to my wireless network, and executed a federal document using my identity. To bypass the mandatory video notary, Julian used a contact from his corporate network, a corrupt title agent, who rubber-stamped the visual verification. Beatrice provided the digital scan of my driver's license she kept from my tax files. She did it to create a false trail. If the bank ever investigated the origin point, the signature would trace back to my own residence. It was a calculated structural maneuver. Julian's signature appeared on the same documents in wet ink executed knowingly alongside the fraudulent digital entry. The paper trail was watertight. Federal investigations do not broadcast their progress. To the outside world, nothing was happening. Spring arrived. The frost melted off the clinic parking lot. Because I had remained silent, Julian and Beatrice deduced that I had surrendered. In their reality, silence equaled submission. They believed the local police had dismissed my claim and that I lacked the funds to pursue civil litigation. Their confidence expanded. Beatrice resumed posting photos of the Bucks County property. She showcased the newly installed hardwood floors and the custom landscaping. Julian felt so secure in his stolen prosperity that he decided to host a massive housewarming party scheduled for Memorial Day weekend. I learned about the event through a mutual acquaintance who had not yet blocked my social media profiles. Julian sent out glossy digital invitations to 50 guests. He hired a string quartet. He booked a gourmet catering service. He intended to display the property to his corporate colleagues and our extended relatives as the ultimate symbol of his success. My mother was listed as the co-host. I watched the responses roll in on the event page. They were preparing to celebrate a victory funded entirely by my stolen signature. I did not comment. I did not react. I forwarded the guest list to Thomas and went back to sweeping the clinic floors. The Thursday afternoon before Memorial Day, my clinic was quiet. I had just finished bandaging a stray beagle and was washing my hands at the stainless steel sink. My mobile phone vibrated on the counter. The caller ID displayed Thomas Pierce. I dried my hands with a paper towel and answered the call. Thomas did not exchange pleasantries. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "and lo, the United States Attorney has reviewed the compiled evidence. The grand jury returned the indictment. The magistrate judge authorized the warrants this morning. We secured authorization for a full asset freeze, property seizure, and federal arrest." I looked out the window of my clinic. The sun was shining on the pavement. The world outside moved at its normal pace, unaware of the tectonic shift that had just occurred on a piece of federal paperwork. I asked him when the authorities planned to move. Thomas paused, letting the weight of the information settle. "They are executing the warrants this weekend," he replied. "They know about the gathering." They prefer to locate all targets in a single unsecured location. The house in Bucks County sat at the end of a long gravel driveway bordered by newly planted hydrangeas. Julian had spared no expense for his Memorial Day housewarming. I parked my 10-year-old sedan on the street behind a line of luxury vehicles. I did not have an invitation. Legally speaking, a property owner does not require permission to access her own land. I walked through the wrought iron side gate at 3:15 in the afternoon. The backyard was a sprawling expanse of manicured grass leading up to a tiered cedar deck. Julian had hired a string quartet. They were sitting under a white canopy playing a chamber arrangement of a modern pop song. A bartender in a crisp white shirt served cocktails from a portable mahogany bar. 50 people milled around the patio. I recognized Julian's coworkers by their tailored casual wear. I saw women from my mother's church group holding crystal glasses. I saw my aunt and 3 cousins, the same relatives who had ignored my text messages for 8 months, standing near a tray of artisanal cheeses. My mother stood on the highest tier of the deck holding a silver microphone. She was wearing a silk floral dress purchased specifically for this occasion. She tapped the microphone grill twice. A soft thud echoed through the outdoor speakers, signaling the crowd to quiet down. She raised her champagne flute, preparing to deliver a rehearsed speech about her son and his triumphant entry into real estate ownership. Then she saw me. I was standing near the edge of the patio wearing a simple navy dress and flat shoes. Her smile faltered. For a fraction of a second, the polished hostess vanished, replaced by a woman calculating the threat level of an unexpected variable. But Beatrice possessed a deep well of hubris. She decided my presence was not a hazard but an opportunity. She would use me as a prop to elevate Julian further. And look who decided to show up, Beatrice announced. Her voice echoed over the speakers, dripping with a manufactured pity designed for an audience. She swept her hand toward my position, directing 50 pairs of eyes to where I stood. You are just a failed vet, Emma. Look at your brother and learn what real success looks like. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the crowd. Some of Julian's colleagues chuckled, politely unsure of the family dynamic, but willing to follow the host's lead. Julian stood beside our mother holding a local craft beer. He adjusted his expensive watch and tilted his chin up, staring down his nose at me. He raised his free hand and snapped his fingers twice at the catering staff, pointing sharply toward the wrought iron gate, signaling them to remove me from his property. He looked deeply inconvenienced that I had arrived to stain his curated aesthetic. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I walked steadily through the crowd. The guests parted, forming a narrow path. I moved past the catered appetizers smelling of smoked salmon and roasted figs. I walked past the string quartet whose cellist paused mid-bow. I climbed the wooden stairs to the cedar deck and stopped 2 feet from Julian. I unclasped my leather shoulder bag. I reached inside and pulled out a thick red envelope. My attorney had provided it the previous day. It contained the federal asset freeze notices, the seizure warrants, and a certified copy of the grand jury indictment. The paper possessed a distinct weight. I handed the envelope to my brother. Happy housewarming, Julian, I said quietly. He took it. His brow furrowed in irritation. He opened the flap and slid the documents out. I stood close enough to watch his eyes scan the bold federal letterhead on the first page. I watched the arrogant posture dissolve. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. He looked exactly like the terrified 10-year-old boy he used to be when he shattered a neighbor's window and knew he had been caught. What is this? He whispered. His voice barely carried over the ambient noise of the party. It is the bill, I replied. Before Beatrice could snatch the papers from his trembling hands, a new sound interrupted the gathering. Heavy tires crunched loudly on the gravel driveway. The noise was distinct, purposeful, and unhurried. 4 unmarked black sport utility vehicles pulled up to the front perimeter of the property, blocking the exit. The doors opened simultaneously. Men and women wearing tactical vests with the letters FBI printed in bright yellow stepped onto the pavement. They did not knock. They did not wait for an invitation. They walked up the driveway in a coordinated formation, flanking the patio and sealing the perimeter. The string quartet stopped playing entirely. The bartender lowered a bottle of gin to the counter. The guests froze, holding their drinks in midair. A senior agent, an older man with graying temples and a steady gaze, bypassed the crowd and approached the cedar deck. Julian Greta, Beatrice Greta, the agent asked. His voice required no microphone to cut through the silent patio. He did not wait for confirmation. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Beatrice dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden deck planks with a heavy thud, followed immediately by a loud, shrieking feedback loop from the speakers. Guests covered their ears. My mother did not look angry. The rigid, arrogant posture she had carried for decades simply evaporated. Her shoulders slumped forward and her knees buckled so violently she had to grip the wooden deck railing to keep from collapsing. A female agent stepped behind her, pulling her hands away from the wood to secure the steel cuffs. Emma. Beatrice gasped, her breathing shallow and erratic as the metal clicked around her wrists. Emma, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I looked at the woman who had stolen my financial future to buy a patio for a party I was not invited to. I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds. I told you, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the stunned guests. I am a failed vet. I would not know how to fix this. I turned my back on the deck. I walked down the wooden stairs, across the patio, and back through the wrought iron gate. I walked down the driveway past the idling federal vehicles while the agents read my mother her Miranda rights. Justice carries a tangible cost. The cinematic version of this story ends with the arrests and a seamless return to normal life. Reality demands a harsher toll. The federal investigation required another 14 months to untangle my compromised credit profile. The bureaucratic friction was exhausting. I lost Oak Creek Veterinary. Without access to capital and burdened by the reputational damage of the frozen accounts, the business could not survive. I had to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy on the clinic to shield myself from the residual financial fallout. I lost my aunts, my uncles, and the illusion of the family I once thought I possessed. They blamed me for the arrests, preferring a comfortable lie over an ugly truth. But I gained something worth far more than a brick building or a high credit score. I relocated to a different county, far from media and bucks. I secured a position as the lead orthopedic surgeon for a large animal rescue organization. I repair shattered femurs and torn ligaments for dogs pulled from terrible situations. I no longer own a business, but I sleep 8 uninterrupted hours every single night. The legal system processed my family with mechanical indifference. Julian pled guilty to reduce his sentence. He is currently serving 41 months in a federal correctional institution. Beatrice opted for a trial and lost. She is serving 24 months. The 4-bedroom colonial in Bucks County was seized by the government, the fraudulent mortgage dissolved, and the property was sold at a public bank auction last autumn. If this narrative reminded you that true independence sometimes requires letting the people you love face the severe consequences of their own actions, leave a comment below. You are never responsible for the damage someone else created, even if they share your blood.